This is my true story. I was a father who gave his whole life to his daughter. I worked long hours, missed meals, and built her future with my own 2 hands. I thought she would one day hold my hand the way I once held hers. But one night she laughed, not at a joke, but at my tears. In front of her friends, my pain became her entertainment. That moment broke something inside me. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply decided to do something that will ruin her life. Before I tell you what I did, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so more people can hear my story. I worked for decades with one dream: to see my daughter live a better life than I ever had. Every morning before sunrise, I left home with tired eyes and a lunchbox in my hand. My hands were always rough from lifting, fixing, building, but my heart stayed soft for her. I paid her school fees when I could barely afford my rent. I skipped doctor visits to buy her textbooks. I repaired shoes, cleaned offices, and worked late in warehouses just to keep her path clear. When she was little, I used to walk miles just to bring her small gifts: a doll, a candy, a ribbon for her hair. Her smile used to wipe away every pain I carried. She was my reason for everything. When she grew older, I still treated her like that small girl with bright eyes. I was proud when she graduated. I gave her my savings to rent her first place, even though it meant eating less for months. I wanted her to have comfort, safety, and a life untouched by the hunger and struggle that shaped me. I paid her bills quietly when she fell behind, pretending it didn't bother me when she forgot to say thank you. I helped her move apartments, fixed her furniture, painted her walls. I trusted her with my love and with what little I had. I thought a daughter's heart was made of gratitude, but I learned it can harden without warning. Over the years, her tone changed. The sweetness faded. She began to talk to me like I was a burden, not a father. She spent money carelessly and laughed when I asked her to save. I told myself it was youth, that she would learn with time. But time didn't bring wisdom. It brought distance. The more I gave, the less she saw me. Birthdays passed without calls. Visits became rare. When she did come, her words cut instead of comforted. Still, I didn't stop giving. When her car broke down, I paid for repairs. When she lost a job, I sent money again. I told myself that love doesn't keep accounts. But love without respect is just debt waiting to break you. I started to feel like a stranger in her world, useful only when she needed something, invisible when she didn't. Sometimes she invited me to gatherings just to show she had a father who helped her grow, but her eyes told the truth. I was a decoration, not family. I still smiled, still hugged her, still said I was proud, because that's what parents do. They give until nothing is left. The last bit of my savings, almost $3 million from my lifetime of work, was locked away safely. The result of decades of sweat and sacrifice. I had always planned to give it to her when the time was right. I imagined she would use it wisely, build a family, secure her future. I thought that money was the symbol of everything I had done right. But that belief would die soon, the same way trust does, quietly. My daughter became someone else. I could see pride in her walk, arrogance in her voice, and coldness in her eyes. She forgot the stories I told her about our struggles, about the nights I went hungry so she could eat. The gap between us became wide, but I didn't cross it. I stayed on my side, watching her drift farther into a world where money meant power and love meant weakness. I thought my silence kept the peace, but it only fed her contempt. I kept thinking that one day she would look back and realize how much I had done. But that day never came. What did come was something I never imagined. A night when the girl I had raised with love would look into my eyes and laugh while I cried. It was meant to be a calm evening. I went to her apartment with a small bag of groceries, simple things I knew she liked. She had guests that night. Loud, well-dressed, full of energy and laughter that didn't leave room for me. I stood by the doorway for a few seconds, waiting for her eyes to notice mine, but she was busy telling stories I didn't understand anymore. When she finally looked, it wasn't warmth that met me. It was impatience. I walked in quietly, set the bag on the counter, and sat in the corner chair that no one ever used. Music played too loudly, bottles clinked, and laughter bounced off the walls. I tried to stay invisible. She moved around the room like she owned the world, glowing under her friend's attention. I watched her face, proud and hollow at the same time, and told myself that this is what success must look like. Loud, fast, and cold. Someone asked about me. I heard my name but not the tone. I lifted my head and smiled faintly, saying I had retired after 40 years of work. It was meant to sound simple, honest. But they laughed. Not cruelly at first, just carelessly, as if an old man's life was a small joke between drinks. Then she joined in. Her laughter came sharp and long, cutting through the noise until it was the only sound left. For a moment I thought she was joking, but her eyes told me otherwise. There was mockery in them, not love. I tried to smile back, but my throat tightened. I looked down, blinked hard, and felt tears slide down my face before I could stop them. That's when it happened. She saw my tears, pointed, and laughed harder. Her friends followed, laughing with her, their voices rising together like a cruel choir. I froze. I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just stood there, feeling the heat on my face and the cold in my heart. Every memory of her childhood rushed back. The nights I carried her to bed, the mornings I walked her to school, the coins I saved for her first bicycle. All of it shattered in one sound. She laughed at my tears. The same tears that once fell for her. The same eyes that once looked at her with pride, now looked at her with disbelief. She turned away, still giggling, whispering something to her friends. They looked at me like I was a stranger who didn't belong. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt heavy. I took a deep breath and walked slowly to the door. No one stopped me. Not one of them said a word. I opened the door, and behind me came another round of laughter, louder this time, freer, as if my pain was the entertainment they had been waiting for. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The city lights blurred as I walked down the steps. I didn't wipe my face. I let the wind dry my tears. Every step echoed against the concrete, slow and heavy. My heart beat quietly, not in anger, but in a kind of death, the death of trust, of fatherhood, of the illusion that love is always returned. I kept walking until the laughter faded behind me and the night swallowed the sound. When I reached home, I sat on the bed without turning on the light. The room smelled of old wood and quiet sorrow. I looked at my hands, the same hands that built her childhood, and felt nothing. No rage, no pity, just stillness. I realized then that something inside me had changed. Something had broken cleanly, leaving behind not emptiness, but calm. I didn't know it yet, but that calm was the beginning of my plan, a silence so deep it would one day freeze her smile the same way her laughter had frozen me. The morning after that night felt slower than usual. I woke before sunrise, not because of habit, but because sleep had become impossible. The image of her laughing face wouldn't leave my mind. Every sound, every echo of her voice repeated like a broken record. I sat by the window and watched the sky turn from black to gray, wondering how a single night could destroy 40 years of devotion. I didn't cry again. There were no tears left. Only silence. By mid-morning, I went to buy bread. The same small shop I had visited for years. The owner, a quiet man, looked at me differently this time. Hesitant, almost awkward. I noticed it immediately. When he handed me the change, his eyes didn't meet mine. I stepped outside and understood why. 2 young men were standing near the road, staring at me with faint smirks. One of them whispered something and the other laughed. I didn't know what they said, but I didn't need to. The look on their faces told me everything. Word had spread. The story had left her apartment and found its way into the town. Somewhere between the walls and the screens, my humiliation had become entertainment. Someone must have recorded the moment. Maybe a friend of hers. Maybe she herself. It didn't matter. It was out there now, a short clip for people to watch and laugh at. The old man crying, the daughter laughing, the crowd enjoying it like a scene from a comedy. I could feel the weight of it in every glance I received that day. At the post office, people turned their heads when I entered. At the park, old friends pretended not to see me. I walked slower, keeping my head down, hoping to pass through their stares unseen. But shame has a way of shining even when you hide it. I could feel it burning across my back, following me like a shadow that refused to fade. Every whisper carried my name. Every smile carried a question. I had become a joke, the man whose daughter mocked him. I tried to keep my routine. I fixed the small things in the house, cooked tea, cleaned the floor. But even silence inside those walls felt loud now. I thought about her again, not as my daughter, but as someone I didn't recognize. I couldn't understand how the same person who once held my hand crossing the street now made the world laugh at my tears. I replayed the moment again and again, trying to find a reason, but there wasn't one. Pride doesn't need a reason. Days passed. The stares didn't stop. I stopped going to the park. I stopped visiting old friends. Even the shopkeeper began to talk softly, carefully, as if I might break. I didn't speak much anymore. I started walking late at night when the streets were empty, when the only eyes on me were those of the streetlights. That was the only time I could breathe freely, when the world slept. One afternoon, I went to buy some vegetables. The market was crowded. I heard laughter behind me, sharp and sudden. I turned, and there they were, two girls about my daughter's age, watching something on a phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen as I passed. It was me, my face, my tears, my pain, turned into a meme for strangers. My steps froze. My heart didn't. It just sank quietly, like a stone. I walked home slower that day, not because of age, but because something inside me was finally dying, the part that believed the world cared. That night, I didn't eat. I sat on the balcony and looked at the empty street. I thought about how easy it is to destroy a man in this world, not with knives, not with guns, but with laughter. Laughter leaves no scars, yet it kills something deeper. My reputation, my dignity, my fatherhood, all gone in one clip. I leaned back, feeling the chair creak under me, and closed my eyes. I let the silence grow until it filled every corner of the night. By the time I opened them again, I was no longer thinking like a broken man. I was thinking like someone who had nothing left to lose. I had learned what pain could teach, that humiliation doesn't end with noise. It ends with planning, quiet, patient, invisible planning. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the half-open curtains. The house felt smaller somehow, as if shame had stolen the air from every room. I moved slowly, folding my blanket, washing my cup, keeping my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander. But silence always finds its way back. Every sound in the house reminded me that I lived alone, the ticking clock, the dripping tap, the slow hum of a life that had been emptied of warmth. I opened the small drawer by my bedside and began sorting through old papers, not because I needed to, but because I had nothing else to do. Inside that drawer were decades of my life, yellowed receipts, old letters, bank slips, and a few photos from better days. I held one where she was still a child, sitting on my shoulders, her hair tied in a red ribbon. The photo trembled slightly in my hands. I placed it down and kept digging, trying to lose myself in the noise of shuffling paper. Then I found it. A thin white envelope with her name on it. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was printed, neat, and official. I turned it over and saw the corner logo of a bank. The seal had already been torn. She must have opened it, skimmed it quickly, and left it behind without a thought. I unfolded the letter carefully. It wasn't long, just a notice about a recent transfer and an investment account tied to a company name, a company I recognized. Years ago, I had worked with one of its founders, a quiet man who handled property deals and large corporate accounts. I hadn't thought of him in over 20 years. Yet here it was. His name, printed clearly under the signature line. My daughter had never mentioned him. She wasn't careful, but she was clever. She probably thought I wouldn't understand what the letter meant. But I did. It was like a spark in the dark, small, quiet, but bright enough to see the path ahead. I realized she had been moving large amounts of money, not hers, not earned, through that account. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe she thought she was untouchable. Or maybe she simply didn't think anyone would notice. But I noticed. And suddenly, My humiliation turned into focus. The letter was not just paper anymore. It was a door, a key, a chance. I folded it again, slower this time, feeling the weight of what I held. I slipped it into my pocket, pressing it flat against my chest. My heartbeat felt steadier now, colder. I didn't rush. I didn't plan revenge that moment. I simply knew the game had changed. I went about the rest of my morning as usual, washed the dishes, swept the floor, made tea, but everything felt different. The world that had mocked me yesterday had no idea what had just shifted inside me. Later that afternoon, I took a walk through town. People still looked, still whispered, still smiled behind their hands. I ignored them all. My steps were slower, but my mind was sharp. I walked past the bank mentioned in the letter. I didn't go in, not yet. I just stood across the street and watched people walk in and out. I knew the man I once worked with wouldn't be there, but I also knew how systems like this worked. I had spent half my life handling papers, signatures, and quiet transactions for others. And I understood one thing clearly. When people think you're weak, they forget to cover their tracks. As the sun began to set, I turned home, the envelope still pressed inside my pocket. I made a small dinner that night, bread and soup, nothing more. I sat by the window again and watched the streetlights flicker on. My hands didn't tremble this time. They rested calmly on the table. The paper inside my pocket felt warm against my chest, as if it were alive. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew that little letter was the start of something much bigger. I went to bed without closing my eyes for long. Every sound of the night, the crickets, the wind, the distant traffic, felt like a countdown. I was done being the joke of the town. I wasn't going to scream, or hit back, or beg for respect. I was going to let that single forgotten letter open every door I needed. The next morning came quiet and gray. The sky outside looked like steel, heavy and still. I sat by the window with my cup of tea and the letter folded neatly beside it. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, slow and calm, the same way my thoughts had begun to move. For the first time since that night, I felt no confusion, no pain, no trembling in my hands. The humiliation had burned itself out, and what remained was colder, sharper, a kind of peace that only comes when you have already lost everything. I picked up the letter again and read it one more time. Every word seemed clearer now. The account, the transfer, the familiar name. All the pieces fit together perfectly. I realized then that I didn't need anger. I didn't need to prove anything to her or to the world. The best revenge is quiet, clean, and patient. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. I folded the paper once more, tucked it back into my pocket, and leaned back in the chair. I thought about all the years I had spent teaching her values: honesty, humility, kindness. I thought about how easily she had turned those lessons into laughter. She thought tears meant weakness. She thought silence meant defeat. But she never learned what silence really is. Silence is control. Its power kept steady. It's the voice of someone who doesn't need to shout to win. I made a decision that morning. I wouldn't call her. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't say a word to anyone. I would simply start moving. Slow, quiet, invisible. Every person who ever laughed at me would one day see what silence can do. I didn't need to make her feel small. I just needed to let her fall into the hole she had dug for herself. All I had to do was open the right door at the right time. I took my notebook and began writing down the names I remembered from the old days. People who worked in banks, offices, and companies. Men and women who handled things quietly, the kind who fixed problems without making noise. I didn't have many left, but I only needed one. One person who could connect a line between her account and the company listed in that letter. I flipped through the pages, and one name stopped me. It was faint, written years ago, but it was still there. The same man whose name was printed on her paper. I smiled, not with joy, but with certainty. I still had his old business card kept inside my documents. I found it after a few minutes, dusty and yellow, but the number was still clear. I didn't call him right away. I just held the card and sat still, letting the decision settle inside me completely. There's a moment between thought and action when everything becomes simple, when emotion fades and reason takes control. I had reached that point. The plan wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. She had left the trail herself. All I had to do was show the right people where to look. I wasn't going to steal. I wasn't going to lie. I was going to tell the truth, quietly, to the right ears. Truth has more power than vengeance when you know how to use it. I waited until the afternoon before making the call. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. The sound of it pulled me back decades, to days when I still believed the world was fair. I spoke slowly, calmly. I reminded him who I was. Then I explained what I had found, every detail, every number, every date. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, there was a short silence on the other end. Then he said, "Leave it with me." That was all I needed to hear. I thanked him quietly, hung up, and set the phone down on the table. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't shake. It was done. No shouting, no fighting, no threats. Just one decision carried out through calm action. I stepped outside, walked to the edge of the street, and watched the sky begin to clear. Somewhere far away, things were already moving. I could feel it, like the start of a slow storm that no one sees coming. 2 days passed without a single word. I kept my phone face down on the table, not because I was nervous, but because I didn't need to check it. The world was already shifting quietly, and I had learned that power never announces itself. It simply acts. On the 3rd morning, I went about my usual routine. I made tea, opened the window, let the cool air in. The street below looked normal, calm, unaware that something irreversible was about to unfold. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write anything down. I just waited for the silence to do its work. By noon, my phone buzzed once. A message. It was short and simple. "It's done." That was all. No details, no drama. Just confirmation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at those 2 words. It was strange how such a small message could carry such a heavy meaning. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I only whispered one thought in my head. Now she will understand. Somewhere across town, her world began to tighten. Her bank account, the one tied to the company from the letter, was flagged. Transactions were stopped. The routine transfers she made every week froze mid-process. Within hours, her phone must have started ringing. Calls from the bank, from her contacts, from people she owed explanations to. But there was nothing she could explain. The money that once gave her confidence now sat in limbo, locked away, untouchable. I pictured her face, not the proud, laughing one, but the one she would wear when the realization hit. That sudden panic when the card doesn't work. The moment of disbelief when the bank denies access. Her friends would be there, confused, asking questions she couldn't answer. The same faces that laughed at my tears would now stare at hers. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could feel it. Justice doesn't always need an audience. As the day went on, more messages came through. Nothing complicated, just updates. The accounts were frozen pending investigation. The authorities had taken interest in certain irregularities linked to her name. My contact said quietly, "You did the right thing." I didn't reply. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about balance. I spent that afternoon walking. The town felt different, lighter, quieter, as if something invisible had been set right. The same people who once watched me with smirks now nodded politely again. They didn't know what had changed, but they could sense it. The old man who walked with bowed shoulders now carried a stillness that demanded respect. I didn't feel proud. I felt free. When I reached home, I turned on the radio. The voice of a newsreader filled the small room, talking about financial audits, company probes, and accounts under scrutiny. I didn't hear her name, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly where that story had started. In my silence. In my humiliation. In that one letter she left behind. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Deep, unbroken sleep. No dreams. No laughter echoing in my head. Just calm darkness. When I woke the next morning, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew who it was. The sound of her name on the screen didn't hurt anymore. It meant nothing. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then I picked it up, turned it off, and placed it in a drawer. Some endings don't need goodbyes. They just need silence. Outside, the day looked clear, warm, peaceful. I packed a small bag, clothes, documents, the few things that mattered. I opened the window one last time, breathed in the air, and let it go. The plan was already working, and soon the world that once mocked me would be nothing but a memory. I locked the door behind me, pocketed my keys, and stepped out without looking back. The road ahead was empty, wide, and quiet, exactly how I wanted it. The morning I decided to leave was clear and still, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy with quiet meaning. I woke up before the first light touched the window. The room was small, simple, half empty, and peaceful. There was no anger left in me. The storm had passed, and all that remained was calm. The sound of the kettle boiling was the only noise in the house. I poured my tea and sat by the window, watching the sky fade from gray to soft blue. I held the cup between my hands and thought about how strange it was, how peace always arrives after destruction, how silence feels louder when justice is already done. I didn't rush. I folded my clothes carefully and placed them in a small brown bag. Just what I needed. One coat, one notebook, my passport, a few papers, and the old watch I had worn for years. I left everything else behind. The furniture, the dishes, the things that once made this place feel like home. None of it mattered anymore. I had spent too many years carrying memories that didn't deserve the weight. This time, I wanted to travel light. I cleaned the table, wiped the counter, swept the floor. Small things, ordinary things, but they meant something. They were my way of saying goodbye without words. As I moved through the house, I felt a strange sense of closure. Every corner, every creak of the floorboard, every faded mark on the wall told a story. I didn't feel sad. I felt complete. The old pain had burned itself into something solid, something unshakable. The humiliation that once broke me had turned into quiet power. My daughter's laughter no longer echoed in my mind. It was gone, replaced by silence that felt earned. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. I just didn't care anymore. That was the real victory, to stop caring about the ones who fed on your pain. I sat down one last time in the chair near the window and wrote a short note. It wasn't long or emotional, just a few words that said enough. You took my dignity once. Now I take my peace. Take care of what's left. I placed it on the table under the teacup and pressed it flat with my hand. My handwriting shook slightly, but my heart didn't. The note wasn't meant for her eyes. It was for mine. Proof that I could leave without hatred. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. The same street that once watched my shame now watched my exit. I stepped out, locking the door slowly, letting the sound of the latch settle into the air. It was like closing a chapter, one that didn't deserve to be reopened. The morning breeze brushed against my face as I walked down the steps. The sun was still rising, and for a brief second, everything looked golden. The trees, the roofs, the road stretching ahead. It didn't look like escape. It looked like freedom. I stopped at the gate and turned once, not to look at the house, but to look at the sky above it. For years, I had stared at that same sky through pain and disappointment. Today, it looked different, lighter, wider, almost kind. I adjusted the strap on my bag and kept walking. My steps were slow but steady, each one carrying me farther from the life that once defined me. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but that was the beauty of it. For the first time in decades, I didn't owe an answer to anyone. I reached the bus stop just as the sun rose fully. A few people stood waiting, their faces blank, their lives quiet and ordinary. I joined them, blending in like another traveler. When the bus came, I climbed aboard, took a window seat, and rested my hands on the bag in my lap. As the engine rumbled and the city began to fade behind me, I felt a stillness I had never known before. I didn't look back once. I didn't need to. The past had already turned to dust. All that remained was the road, the horizon, and the quiet peace of a man who had finally walked out of his own pain. The next morning, while I was miles away and the world outside my window rolled by in silence, she woke to her first taste of consequence. I imagine the day began like any other for her. The phone on the nightstand buzzing with notifications, the coffee brewing in the kitchen, the routine arrogance that came with comfort. But when she reached for her wallet to pay for something small, her world must have cracked. The card declined. Once, twice, again. Confusion first, then disbelief. She must have tried another card, another account. The same result. Nothing worked. The money she once used like air was gone, locked, frozen in place. She would have called the bank first. I can picture her pacing the room, frustration in her voice, trying to sound in control. But control doesn't survive reality. The polite tone of the banker would have turned firm. "Your account is under review." The phrase would echo in her ears, over and over. The voice on the phone explaining procedures, investigations, pending inquiries. None of it would make sense to her. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one in charge. Her panic must have grown fast. She would have called her friends next, the same ones who had laughed with her that night. But friends disappear when the money stops flowing. The messages she sent probably sat unread. The calls went unanswered. By afternoon, the pride that once filled her face would have started to crumble. She would have gone to the bank in person, rushing through those glass doors in the same heels she once clicked with confidence. And there, behind that counter, someone younger, colder, would have told her the same thing again. "Your accounts are frozen until further notice." Maybe she argued. Maybe she demanded. Maybe she cried. It wouldn't matter. The system doesn't respond to tears. I like to think she looked around the room searching for sympathy and found none. People only care about your laughter until it stops. Then they look away. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not revenge, not victory, but silence. The kind that arrives when arrogance finally meets consequence. She must have gone home in the evening, exhausted, her phone filled with missed calls from debt collectors and unanswered questions. She would have tried to reach me then. My name flashing again and again on her screen, each time met with the same cold response. No answer. Maybe she shouted, maybe she begged, maybe she cried into the empty room. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. Some moments are better left unseen. By the time the sun set that day, she must have understood. Everything she mocked, every tear she laughed at, had come back to her in silence. I could picture her sitting on the same couch where she once stood laughing, the screen of her phone lighting her face as she scrolled through dead accounts and frozen balances. For the first time, she would have felt small, not because someone made her feel that way, but because truth had stripped her pride bare. I was far away by then, a quiet hotel room, a suitcase at the foot of the bed, my phone on the table, turned off. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars. I made tea in the small kettle they kept near the bed and sat by the window. Somewhere out there, she was learning what I had known for years, that pride without love always ends in emptiness. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just felt a long breath leave my chest. Not satisfaction, but closure. The kind that comes when the balance of life quietly restores itself. She had laughed at my tears. Now, the world laughed at her silence. When night came, I packed my things again and placed the last of my money, what she thought was gone, neatly into my jacket pocket. $3 million, transferred, untouched, safe. I looked at the city lights one last time and whispered to the window. Now she understands. Then I turned off the light and let the quiet fill the room completely. By the time a week had passed, the town had already begun to talk. It started small, the way gossip always does. A whisper at the market, a quiet comment at the cafe, a few glances at her when she walked by. Then the story spread like wind through dry grass. Everyone knew something had happened to her. The girl who once mocked her father now stood at the bank every morning, arguing with tellers who couldn't help her. Her laughter was gone. Her voice had lost its strength. The money she flaunted, the pride she wore like armor, had disappeared. The same people who once envied her now kept their distance. The story of her fall was far more interesting than her success. The videos that once showed her laughing were deleted. The friends who once shared them stopped replying to her messages. Her phone calls went unanswered and the invitations stopped coming. The silence around her grew thicker by the day. She tried to explain to people what had happened, that it was a mistake, that it wasn't her fault, but no one believed her. Pride has a short memory, but humiliation lasts longer. The same street that once clapped for her victories now whispered about her downfall. I heard the stories from far away, small details carried by voices that didn't even know I was listening. She had sold her car. She had moved into a smaller apartment. She was behind on rent. Her confidence had cracked so deeply that even her smile looked forced when people saw her. She walked fast, kept her head down, and avoided the places where she used to be loudest. Some people pitied her. Others found satisfaction in her misery. That's how the world works. Cruel to the weak, silent to the strong, and fascinated by both when they switch places. Meanwhile, I lived quietly. The $3 million sat untouched in an account under my name. The money wasn't the victory. The silence was. No one knew where I had gone. No one knew how I had done it. People just said the old man vanished, and the daughter who had mocked him had lost everything overnight. I stayed in a small rented room by the sea. The sound of waves replaced the noise of shame. I spent my days walking along the shore, watching gulls drift above the water, listening to the world breathe again without me in it. It felt good, not joyful, not triumphant, just right. Some nights I thought of her, not with hate, but with a strange kind of pity. She had built her life on surface things, money, attention, pride, and thought they would last forever. She never learned the quiet strength that comes from losing everything and still standing up. I wondered if she ever thought of me, or if her mind refused to go there. Maybe she told herself I had betrayed her. Maybe she still thought I would return. But she didn't understand. I didn't leave out of revenge. I left because peace can't live in a place where love has died. People around her began to move on. The story became old, replaced by newer ones, but the damage stayed. The same neighbors who once smiled now avoided her. The men who once called her beautiful now looked away. The friends who once ate at her table now ate somewhere else. She learned what it means to be alone in a crowd, the same way I had once learned. And in that mirror, life finally balanced itself. I stopped reading the news. I stopped checking messages. I stopped looking back altogether. My days became simple again. Breakfast at dawn, walks by the shore, tea in the evening, sleep under quiet stars. No noise, no weight, just air. Sometimes people in town asked about my past. I told them I was retired. They smiled politely, not knowing the story behind those words. That's how I liked it. The world moved on without both of us. She stayed behind, learning the price of pride. I moved forward, learning the value of silence. And between those two lessons, a lifetime finally made sense. The sea became my home. Every morning I woke to the sound of waves touching the shore like gentle reminders that the world still moves, no matter who laughs, no matter who falls. I rented a small room above a fisherman's store, white walls, one window, one wooden chair. I didn't need more. The quiet suited me. I would sit there for hours, drinking tea and watching the boats drift in and out. Some days I spoke to the fishermen, sometimes I didn't. I had learned that silence says more than words ever can. I carried no anger anymore. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving only peace behind. Peace and a kind of wisdom that pain teaches slowly. I often thought about how strange it is that life always finds a way to balance itself. I had cried once, humiliated, mocked by the one I loved most. Now she cried instead, not because I wished it, but because that's what truth does when it circles back. It always finds its way home. The world had laughed at my tears, and now the world had turned its back on hers. Not by my hand, not by my revenge, just by the quiet rhythm of justice that time always brings. I didn't need to punish her. Time already had. Some evenings, when the sky turned orange and the air smelled of salt, I would walk along the sand and think about the old days, when she was small, when she called me her hero, when her laughter was still innocent. I could still see that little girl in my memory, chasing waves, holding my hand tightly so she wouldn't fall. Sometimes I missed that version of her, the one who still knew love. But the woman she became? That part of her was gone, and I had buried it the same way I buried my old pain, deep, beneath silence. People in the village began to know me as the quiet old man who lived by the sea. They didn't ask questions, they just smiled and nodded. That was enough. I never told anyone my story. Not the tears, not the shame, not the plan. Some things are better left as lessons the wind carries. I lived simply, spent little, spoke less. My life had finally become small, clean, and calm, the way I always wanted it before pride and cruelty took it from me. One morning, as I sat by the window sipping tea, a seagull landed on the railing. It tilted its head and stared at me, curious but unafraid. I smiled faintly. The sea roared softly behind it, endless, forgiving. I thought about how everything I had chased, love, family, respect, had been nothing but water slipping through my hands. Yet, in losing it all, I had gained something heavier, something that stays: freedom. Freedom from the need to be understood. Freedom from the pain of being unseen. Freedom from waiting for apologies that never come. I knew she was still searching for me. The bank had closed the case, the money remained untouched, and no one could trace where I'd gone. Sometimes I imagined her sitting alone, scrolling through old photos, wondering if I was alive or dead. She might still hope to find me. She might want to say sorry. But she never would. Some wounds don't close with words. They close with distance. The truth is, I didn't take the money to hurt her. I took it because it was mine, earned, saved, and given away too easily. I took it back the way a man takes back his breath after nearly drowning. Slowly, quietly, and without apology. I didn't leave her broke. I left her with a lesson, that laughter has a cost, and not every tear can be washed away. As the sun went down that evening, I finished my tea and set the cup on the sill. The waves were turning gold beneath the light. I closed my eyes, feeling the wind on my face, and whispered to the sea, "It's done." I had come to this place a broken man and would leave it a free one. I had been mocked, humiliated, and forgotten. But in the end, I had written my own ending, one of silence, dignity, and peace. She laughed at my tears once. The next day, her laughter ended, and I vanished with $3 million and something far more valuable: my self-respect.